Hello and welcome to our webcast today. My name is Richard Hollis. I'm joined by Alliance Vice President of Strategy, Patrick Sullivan. Today we're going to bring you a couple of ideas, but essentially we're calling it Mind the Gap, how to bridge the gaps in between upcoming new EU legislation that affects cybersecurity requirements. Patrick's at the helm with the clicker. I'm the talent who's opening up with my pleasant demeanor. Anyway, Patrick, shall we get started? Let me just welcome you all again. If you have any questions, if there's anything, put them in the chat box. We'll get back to you. If not during this broadcast, then directly afterwards. But by all means, throw over some questions and we'll do our best to answer them. Let's get started, Patrick.
Sure.
So just by way of introduction, my name is Richard Hollis. I'm the director of a company called Risk Crew. We're located in London. We work with Align on many a successful engagement for GRC, governance, risk and compliance projects, things like ISO, SOC 2. And we're looking at the market and see that there's a lot of significant legislation coming up that all of our clients are asking us for, hence the webcast. Patrick, why don't you introduce yourself? Because I can go on for days about your experience.
Oh, and thank you, Richard. First of all, I do want to say I'm absolutely enamored by your 5.3 cups of coffee per day. I've tried so long to be able to limit myself.
Now you just stole my thunder, Patrick, because I've got specific slides towards the end of the presentation where we talk about my caffeine intake, but go ahead.
Apologies. Welcome, everyone. As Richard said, my name is Patrick Sullivan. I currently serve as VP of Strategy Innovation at Align. Again, as Richard said, I've worked in the field of IT a little north of 25 years now in various roles and various job functions and various domains of focus, from IT management to managed and cloud services, managed security services, and really over the past decade with a hard focus on cybersecurity and compliance. At Align, the firm at which I currently serve, which I'm very proud to serve, I should say, Align serves as a third-party cybersecurity risk and compliance firm. And so as you think about external regulation and external standards to which many organizations must adhere, Align focuses on providing assurance through audit and attestation, and in some cases certification, quite frankly, that organizations are doing the right and responsible things to protect their customers' data. That's a little bit about me, Richard.
And that's more than I knew, Patrick. I'm kidding. No, I would say, it's nicely put what Align does. We've been working with Align just to extend my introduction. Met Patrick and the Align team about 2.5-3 years ago. I think it's been we're 3 years down the line, and Align will go in and set up the framework, and Risk Crew. Risk consultants would go in and literally connect the dots, as we say in the business, make sure that the policies have controls, and controls are aligned and up in Align's framework as they come in as an auditor. So it's been a really successful relationship. There's a lot of it's a symbiotic relationship, Patrick, as far as I'm concerned, and hence why it's so natural to speak together today. Okay, let's get started. We're gonna spend the day we're gonna spend the next hour or so, first of all, talking about just there's two or three very what I would call significant upcoming regulations out here in the EU. And we're going to talk about those, what they are, big picture, and then we're going to talk about how it makes sense to just bridge them, do many frameworks once, do it once and have it apply many times, and then talk about what best practices look like for compliance integration, integrating controls, making sure your policies and compliant and your controls are actually integrated, and then how to leverage and get the most out of your technology and your services, and then some final takeaways. And as I said, if you have any questions, please send them over and we'll do our best to answer them, if not during the webcast and certainly thereafter. Let's start by taking a look at some of the top three, what I consider the top upcoming. This is what our clients are coming to pretty much on a daily basis. Let's start with NIS2, the directive. This is, NIS2 is essentially the Network and Information Systems Directive, Part 2. There's been a Part 1. This is the update of that, and it specifies what I would call a higher bar of cybersecurity that needs to be implemented by EU companies that are considered critical infrastructure, specifically energy, electricity, all the way to heating and cooling, oil and gas, transport industries, air, rail, water, even the road, and of course the all-important finance. These are critical national infrastructures as seen across the European Union. And the legislation, in a nutshell, if I had to characterize it, it literally raises the bar. It requires stronger requirements for these, what are considered these critical service providers, with a sharper focus on business continuity, resiliency. All right, how fast can you identify, respond, and recover, and of course supply chain, which we've all learned the hard way. May have overlooked.
And what I think is really interesting with this, Richard, is that NIS2 is a directive, which I think many of your listeners are already aware of. What makes that a little bit unique in my perspective is that as a directive, each member state, to my understanding, will have the opportunity to determine what the final rule will look like inside their own boundaries. So I think we'll see a little bit of variability in some ways, with levels of complexity, levels of discernment, levels of security. I don't know if you share that opinion.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Patrick. And I, as an American working in London, I look at Europe as, some European countries are they put cybersecurity under a microscope. Germany jumps to mind. Very, very restrictive.
Huge.
Yeah, and you can, and somewhat looser across Spain, maybe Italy. But what I like about this, Patrick, is that this, in terms of non-compliance, is there a carrot? Is there a stick? The stick is not only fines, but it's also fines for the business managers, the independent registered directors of the company, which I think is significantly focused. So no matter how, culturally where you're located across the EU, that what is going to be baseline is that, yes, each country can practice it a little differently, but all countries have to hold business managers directly responsible, legally responsible, that's an attention getter for me.
And the managers having skin in the game does make it a fundamentally different thing.
All the difference in the world, as you can imagine. So I like that. I like that, and I think because of that, this is some legislation to be reckoned with. It's going to get your attention, no matter how much skin. When you have that kind of skin in the game as a business manager, I think it's going to get its due attention and hopefully the budget. But for me, again, it raises the bar. We've overlooked businesses gotten hit with things like ransomware and weren't able to come back, didn't have backups, didn't have business continuity, disaster recovery plans that worked, they weren't tested, these things. And of course, the supply chain, the software as a service supply chain, a dilemma we all face. So NIS2 is going to strengthen those two areas of a business's cybersecurity appetite.
You mentioned strengthening. I think about what we have here in the States, in the US. We do have critical infrastructure legislation, but it centers largely around information sharing of indicators of compromise, vulnerabilities, things like that. And so we've seen independently managed information sharing analysis centers, ISACs, stand up to support the US legislation, but we certainly don't see the stick that's provided by NIS2 with EU member states. Now, Richard, do you think that there's potential that vision, that philosophy could actually expand to something more? We've talked about GDPR and how GDPR has provided a role model for other countries throughout the world. Do you think this maybe takes on that same air?
I do, I really do. And the other thing I pick up is this is also legislation that's evolving. We went from NIS1 to NIS2, and I will guarantee we'll see a NIS3 five, 6 years from now. Yep. The whole idea is they're raising the bar slowly, higher and higher. And yes, I think this has, I think this, like GDPR, I think this has a global impact because it applies to just not just these critical national infrastructures, like energy and transport, but also to suppliers who want to do business with them. So this will be perpetuated on through a supply chain to make sure, where once upon a time you had to be ISO compliant if you wanted to be a supplier to company X. Now we're going to start seeing across Europe, you have to be NIS2 compliant. So I think it's got a big knock-on effect worldwide. Absolutely.
That's huge. So it's time for organizations, for those business leaders listening. This is not something to bury your head in the sand about. I think really is the take home.
No, you'll wake up when you get the fine with your name on it.
With your specific name.
Yeah. Okay, that's NIS2 in a nutshell. Go ahead and take me over to the next one, Patrick, let's talk about DORA. DORA, this is something unique. DORA is a lot like NIS2, but very, very specifically towards the finance industry, banks, insurance companies, investment firms. It's called the Digital Operational Resilience Act. It's once again, it's legislation, and the whole idea, and the same thing, it applies to just not only the banks, the insurance companies, the investment firms, the financial sectors, but those businesses doing business with the financial sectors.
Yes.
And I think the big one to pull out here is also the information, the ICT, information communication tech systems, that, you know, the infrastructures, the information, the internet service providers, IT service providers, these are going to be under the full crosshairs of DORA. And DORA is, you know, again, it's pretty simple, but it's all about resiliency. There's 5 pillars, you know, 5 parts of DORA. The first part is about risk management. So we're talking about a lot of, you know, risk assessments, and what that comes out in terms of identifying, minimizing, and managing the risks to the business. That's documented. You've got a classification scheme. You've got a reporting infrastructure. You've got accountability within the business. You've got operational resiliency, your business continuity, your disaster recovery. These plans work. You've got them tested. And once again, they're looking, one of the pillars is managing supply chain risks. Right? So once again, it's got us to focus on, it's not just the business, it's anything connected to the business, and anything the business, you know, the ICT, the suppliers, as well as the supply chain that the businesses are reliant on. And then information sharing agreements, which dovetail into GDPR and large data sharing agreements that go across the EU. Patrick, many notes on this?
And just some general thoughts. And that really is what I love so much about DORA is, you know, as we take a step back and think about traditional information security, I think everybody's familiar with the concept of the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. As I think about existing third-party standards, not regulation, but third-party standards on the market today, the PCI is an example. The PCI data security standard absolutely takes a hard focus on securing data. It gives little care, little focus on ensuring that data is available. And so with DORA as a regulation, we have an opportunity to see a framework, a set of regulation that really is doing nothing more than asking organizations to do the right thing, to manage and monitor all aspects of the CIA triad, including data resiliency. And so I think about your current customers, or for those listeners that currently have a management system, let's say ISO 27001 deployed. You have a management system in place that's intended to help you think reasonably and logically about information security in your environment. The addition of adding business continuity and disaster recovery through another management system like ISO 22301, the ability to integrate those things offers organizations a way to grow maturely while growing in adherence and conformance to the standard itself. So DORA, in my mind, is common sense in so many ways. And it's really interesting to see how much fear this is creating in the market with people that we speak with. Because as we think about risk, to your point, Richard, you know, traditionally we think of risk as, and I hate to say this, but many organizations will sit in a room and brainstorm risks, and then they have a risk register. None of that really translates into practical, actionable, real world things. With DORA, we see for the first time, however, as we think about risk, we have to look at risk every step along the way. You have to have a vulnerability management program in place. It's got to be there. You have to actively penetration test your environment, pen test your environment to challenge those assumptions you have about what the real risks are. So again, in a lot of ways, DORA, in my mind, as we mentioned before about NIS2, potentially providing a framework that could be used globally, DORA, in my mind, does very much the same thing.
Yeah, in a practical way, you're absolutely right. It integrates risk management approach into everything the business does, and make accountable for that. You know, and that the at the end of the day, the risk is analyzed across the board and documented, and then addressed. How it's addressed, something different. You know, it still leaves each business to have their own risk appetite, but essentially it mandates that practicality, as you said, of going through the basics. And it's the law. You know, like guys like me, I've been working 20 years, and we look to ISO 27001 of that. Very common sense, very practical, very have you considered this? Have you considered this? This, you know, but it's not mandated. This is the law. Yeah, and to me, DORA and NIS2 are legislating common sense. That
Yes.
practical, yeah, have I done everything I can possibly do and get on with the business and mandating it as the law? That's and okay, great. That's about time. But I look at these two, just like you said, and I look and they scream common sense, and then I think, and you know what? Technically, if you're engaged in the cybersecurity program, you're well down the road for compliance for all of these.
Well,
You
down the
know,
road.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you should be just making sure that you're fine tuning your approach and you've got it well documented. Anyway, so yeah, it's funny because, like you said, everybody seems to be overreacting, and on the other hand, I think, well, what are you currently doing now? And if you're even close to practicing ISO 27001, whether you're compliant or not, you're in a framework of common sense that is going to be so easy for you to take these two pieces of legislation on.
And
And don't be
that is
afraid
my
to face
opinion.
it.
It is. Now, one thing I will say, and I think this is important for listeners that are just hearing about DORA, there is an impending deadline. And Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, but 17 January 2025?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. DORA comes in full effect. All right, it's already was enacted technically January 2023, but we've got 2 years, so it's January 17th. I want to say 2025, the deadline. So they're coming in the shallow end of the pool, which is very commendable. It's not at the stroke of midnight you must be compliant. Over the next 2 years, you're supposed to be moving toward compliance as you go through these pillars and mature your organization. So you've got 2 years on it, but as we all know, that's not a lot of time in terms of getting your house in order. So no, that's a good point. Where NIS2 technically comes to effect this October, October 17th, I think is the
24, yes.
yeah, the 2024. So NIS2 and DORA 2025 January, but the idea is you mature into compliance, which also has a lot of common sense behind it.
Now, one last thing I think for listeners, as we do talk about regulation, and this is something that I think our EU listeners are probably already very, very familiar with. American listeners, maybe not so much, but the expectation, the regulation is that certain activities will be performed, that systems will be in place to ensure that we're treating data in a responsible, reasonable, grown-up way. From an external attestation perspective, with DORA specifically, it is the burden, it is the obligation of each individual organization to ensure that they're running their processes internally, annually, and that they have available, upon request, reporting around their current position as it relates to conformance to the standard.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, good point, Patrick.
Next up, Richard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's NIS2, that's DORA. Let's talk about one more that's on everybody's radar, whether you're doing it or not.
My favorite.
Yeah, the artificial intelligence, the European Union's Artificial Intelligence Act. Well, that technically becomes law, I think, as we speak. This summer, they keep saying it's been moved from June to July. I literally just got online about an hour before. It seems to be enacted, but nobody's actually, made the. Yes, go ahead, Patrick, jump in.
Well, and this is wonky, and I'm not sure why the EU does this. So the regulation becomes official 20 days after being signed into the EU official journal. It was signed into the EU official journal about a week and a half ago.
Yeah,
so
you're absolutely right.
August 1st.
You are getting wonky, Patrick. I love that.
Yeah,
I saw that and I was thinking I couldn't be bothered to count the calendar days.
Yeah.
Technically, it's like, getting married. You're posting your intent to marry on this, and anybody who objects got to come forward in 20 days. But yes, I literally think in the next 3 or 4 days, it becomes actual law. I'm very impressed with this, both, on a personal and a professional level. I'm not sure how big the impact will be on businesses in terms of, most businesses are struggling to come up and find out how are they using AI? Will they be compliant, to things like the new ISO standard for AI? But this is a specific piece of legislation aimed at people who are providing trustworthy AI systems, and and to make sure that those AI systems and the algorithms that they use essentially respect fundamental human rights and ethical principles of where they got the data, how they'll use the data, how the data is actually used. But it's a beautiful piece of legislation that literally looks to make sure we install principles into how we develop these AI systems. And there, so we give thought to the negative impact it can have on both people, businesses, countries, and we understand the consequences associated with that. So it pulls in the reins. Now, as I understand it, and I've seen a couple chapters, albeit draft, it'll be issued chapter by chapter, and the whole idea, a lot like DORA, it'll be phased in over the next 3 years.
Exactly
okay,
right.
And it's going to apply to people who provide these AI systems to businesses, and more importantly, to us as end users. To make sure that from cybersecurity to ethical concerns were addressed during the development of the applications. So it's huge. It's significant. I think I'm answering a lot of questions to clients, but I'm separating the difference between how a business uses it and make sure that they have a policy on the right and wrong way to use whatever they procure or buy from a service provider who's got an AI solution that they use. But most of us right now are struggling to even understand how we're using AI, and we are using AI in our current businesses.
To your point, years ago, we talked about shadow IT, and I think one of the biggest things organizations are dealing with today is shadow AI. Wherein executives legitimately do not know all the places that AI is being used, either to perform a personal function on business equipment or to perform some business function that at some point has become vital, integral to what the organization is doing. Earlier you mentioned fundamental human rights, and what I think is really unique about the AI Act is that it's written under the same guise as other EU consumer protections. And so as we think about this, it's a consumer protection standard, but those consumer protections are around 3 things: democracy, fundamental human rights, and rule of law. And so the AI Act is intended to ensure that no single entity can violate those 3 things, those fundamental consumer protections for EU citizens, which is a huge deal. Now, really the huge unknown in my mind today, because Sentinelec hasn't fully published their expectations, is around what conformance to the AI Act will look like. How will we know if what we're doing puts us in a position to really withstand a conformance assessment? And so today, there aren't a lot of great answers here, which, Richard, is exactly why we point organizations toward ISO 42001. 42001 as a repeatable, well-known, internationally recognized AI management system standard, in my mind, offers organizations a way to take steps today to be proactive, to ensure that they do have what the AI Act refers to as a quality management system, a QMS, in place to ensure that they can withstand a conformance assessment if and when that time comes.
That's a great point, Patrick. I was just about to say that, in terms of the legislation, compliance of the legislation, non-compliance could be up to 7% of your global turnover, which is, as we're all, significant, huge. But there's another kicker: is if you're using a non-compliant AI solution, you too, as a business, may be subject to fines and penalties. So they're going to fine not only the generators of these AI software solutions, but any businesses who are knowingly using them. As you rightly point out, getting back, to the ISO standard for which just essentially says, ask the question, do the risk assessment. All right, put it through, the algebraic X equals Y before you go out and whether you're purchasing or starting to use this to make business decisions. Have you done due diligence on the system itself? Because if you don't, you might be subject to fines for non-compliance when the vendor itself gets fined. So it's a two-way street.
What I really love about 42001, and you kind of hinted at this just now, as I said a moment ago, the AI Act is really about consumer protection, fundamental human rights, democracy, rule of law. 42001 is, though it's labeled a management system because it does offer management processes and requires management commitment, 42001 is really a governance infrastructure. So it's about value creation, leveraging AI systems, leveraging how organizations are using AI systems to align with their business goals, to really innovate and push things forward but in a responsible way. And so the merit of those two things, strong focus on innovation, strong focus on repeatability, all the benefits of the Deming loop. Let's plan, do, check, act. Let's do things the right way, the efficient way, coupled with consumer protections, in my mind, makes a marriage that really does bring to bear the best of everything.
That's a good point. But I was going to say, to paranoid schizophrenics like me, I look at the 42001 and I see just, that kind of pragmatic, harness the value, but understand the risks. For me, I look at that standard and all I see is risk assessment, risk assessment, risk assessment, risk assessment, and then make your decision. And to me, that's getting back to this pragmatic approach, the common sense approach. I love the ISO 42001 because it just says, all right, fine. Is it right for you? Understand the risks, and then document those risks, address those risks, and get on with life, get on with business. So it's it mandates thinking is what it does, before you just run off and start using something. So I loved it. Yeah, good point. Anyway, so it's going to be at the end of the day, we're all going to feel it, both from a user and user, hopefully. And but you don't underestimate the impact this can have on your business if you're knowingly or unknowingly, because you didn't follow common sense and do a risk assessment on the AI solution you're using and understand it doesn't meet the EU AI Act. You are guilty by association.
Richard, I would say this, and this might be a gross overstatement, but I feel comfortable making it. This is my opinion, no one else's. But the AI Act will impact everyone, regardless of country of origin. The AI Act will impact everyone. There's no doubt in my mind.
Everybody, I agree. Everybody on the planet. I think this is significant legislation that's and already. Everybody else seems to be behind. I love the EU. That's they had the foresight, they had the vision to be working on this 5 years ago. So no, I'm hoping this is what we all hope it needs to be. Great. Okay, those are the three. We talked about NIS2, we talked about DORA, and then finally the AI Act. So the point of the webcast today, Patrick, was for us to talk about not doing them separately, okay? Looking at all of your governance requirements, your existing ones, these upcoming ones like DORA, NIS2, maybe even the AI Act, and understanding you can bridge these. You can do them all together. You don't need to, do it once. You use it many times. It should be the T-shirt that we give out for the webcast. But it's amazing, Patrick. Many of my clients just take on, they literally assign different stakeholders for different for different frameworks, rather than look at all the frameworks and put them all together and do it once and make it apply across the board where it can apply, need to apply.
Richard, to support that, we at Align, we run an annual compliance benchmark survey wherein we poll the field, we poll the community to see how executives are thinking about their compliance programs at any given time. And, this year, one of the statistics that really stood out to me was that 90+% of respondents, which again are largely executives for organizations, recognize that there is a more efficient way to approach their compliance programs as it relates to tying various assessments. They're thinking about various standards together, but only about 15 to 20% are doing anything with it. And so what we see is this huge cognitive dissonance where I know there has to be a better way, but for some reason, and that reason I think is largely that I feel stuck and I'm not sure what to do. For whatever reason, executives are not doing what needs to be done to begin bringing these efficiencies to bear for their organization.
Yeah, I don't know. I see it on a different level, and you're absolutely right. For me, it's almost I'm scratch my head why there's different stakeholders who have different frameworks. I mean, I literally can talk to a stakeholder who owns a PCI compliance framework and another one who owns ISO 27001. I'm thinking, hey, you could put those two things together and save a lot of resources. How come? And two different budgets, two different meetings that are held on compliance for this, compliance for that. And it's odd that we don't see this more often. That these this is common sense by the board to sit down and say, in terms of cybersecurity or information security or data protection, what do we have to comply to? Put them all up and just very quickly understand how much they all have in common, and they scream out for me, for one stakeholders to see the big picture, who understands the breadth and depth of what they have to have in place across the board, and not that it's all siloed across the business.
It is missing the big picture, to your point, Richard. I think as we look at most of the standards, some sit on an island by themselves, there's no question, but most of the standards are about first principles that we talked about earlier: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. As we get into the specifics of each standard, maybe there's a focus on data type. Maybe it's cardholder data, maybe it's EPHI. Regardless, we're still talking about protecting sensitive data for our organization. And with those first principles in mind, each standard varies in degree, but not kind. So we'll see controls like a risk assessment.
Yes.
Risk assessment is fundamental to almost every third-party cybersecurity standard on the planet. Why would we separate those things just because this label says PCI and this label says ISO 27001? It's a lack of understanding.
Don't know. And, to geeks like me, to do a risk assessment and not be cognizant of other compliance frameworks that need to be considered, it is in and of itself a risk, and should go on your risk assessment.
Yes.
No, it's odd, but no, the classic for me has been ISO 27001 and SOC 2. And it literally says the same thing. It applies to a different technology, a different platform, but the same esprit in terms of confidentiality, integrity, availability. You need policies, you need a classification scheme, you need accountability, you need a risk register, you need and it's if you did it once and then moved out, you'd find you'd have very little to do. It just boggles my mind. But I talk to organizations who have a different point of contact for SOC 2 and a different point of contact for ISO, and then yet another one over here for GDPR or data protection, and then there's the PCI person you want to talk to, he's over here, and it's all about sensitive data, and you just don't understand why they just didn't step back 10, 23 paces and look at the bigger picture.
Yes, and Richard, real quick, just for those executives listening, Richard mentioned the overlap of SOC 2 and ISO 27001 specifically. You can each register for an account on the AICPA website, the American Institute of CPAs. They're the group largely responsible for shepherding the SOC 2 standard. In the AICPA website, you can download a cross-mapping from SOC 2 to ISO 27001. And AICPA in that cross-mapping even indicates, again, depending on sufficient scoping, depending on a few things that ensure that we're looking at apples to apples. But when we are comparing apples to apples for the attestation and certification, there can be as much as a 50 to 60% overlap in required controls to meet the intent of the SOC 2 criteria versus the ISO 27001 control standards, which is just, that is a point.
The visual alone, looking at the visual alone, is compelling evidence of saying, why do we need this? Why is this two projects? Why isn't this one project?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, you want to take us? We could get carried away with that.
I think we are, Richard, for what it's worth.
Yeah, clearly. Okay, so obviously these are Patrick, why don't you chime in here? This is one-stop shopping. One vision gives you efficiency and a technical
and it really is
a lot more coherence, a laser focus in terms of, if you put all of your requirements on the same table, you'd have a much better view about what to pick from in terms of controls, what controls would be more effective, and you could pick one control and it could just be only effective for one framework. And however, if you stood back and took another look, you could pick out a control that would meet both frameworks and save some time and effort here. So the increase in efficiency, and it brings you a laser focus in terms of what you need. You buy it once, you put it in, you monitor it. But we're talking about better risk management and a more firm security posture.
Better governance, Richard. And that's really how I think about this. ISAC defines governance as three core processes. So evaluate, direct, and monitor. Evaluate against the known good standard, direct or make decisions about what priorities need to be, and then monitor progress toward the goals that you've set. Now, I know you've got a slide in a moment where you're going to talk about how we get to a place that we can really set those priorities and those KPIs. But as we think about the benefits of approaching our compliance program from an integrated perspective, in my mind, it's all about value creation. Efficiency, yes. Efficiency in our people's time, efficiency in engaging with external auditors in the event that you do need an external attestation or certification, efficiency on your team's ability to focus on what it is they're really there to do. You don't want your network engineers sitting in audits for 40 hours a week. You want your network engineers focused on doing the hard work of ensuring that your systems are up and running safely and securely. And so to your point, by taking this integrated approach, this integrated view, we have an opportunity to think about how we evaluate the effectiveness of our compliance program consistently, not in silos, not that I'm doing well with PCI, but not ISO. These things have to be evaluated holistically. That's the only way to be successful with this. And how do we get this program better? We really need to take a programmatic approach to how we run, evaluate, and think about compliance in our organization. And that can only happen by deciding to do it.
The glaring example I've seen recently, well, I've seen for the last 4 or 5 years, has been in the duplication. It eliminates duplication. But and the best example I can tell you about that is I actually have clients who get from the same who get a supply chain risk assessment that's done for GDPR, and then here's another one for ISO, then here's another one for cloud, then here's another one for and they're literally they're duplicating their effort. Rather than ask their supplier one set of questions, they ask them 3 or 4 or 5, 6, separate questions. And then, of course, when they get the answers back, they conflict.
Yes.
And then they got to get on phones. Did you mean this? Because part of your organization, because they go down these funnels, they go into these dark alleys, and people say, oh, you mean our credit cards? Yeah, well, that database is not encrypted. And then you think, well, geez, are you sure?
Over here, that it is. Cardholder data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So suddenly you get many answers, specifically in the supply chain, and this duplication again raises risks. It's just crazy that people don't see how easy or how these benefits that stand out right in front of us.
And Richard, you've just brought to mind, and I know we need to move on, but something I think is important for listeners to hear. By focusing on consolidation approaching your compliance program from a holistic perspective, you regain a sense of agency. Richard mentioned the confusion that a lot of companies run through, and I'm sure you've dealt with this as well, wherein you're not sure what is really happening behind the scenes.
Yep.
And so in those instances, when you do get questioned by a prospect, when you see a new standard show up in a contract that a customer wants you to sign, there's a fear, there's a backpedaling that happens. And I'll tell you, you can really take control of that and regain your own agency as a decision maker. You can regain the ability to say no to things that don't make sense simply by being proactive and approaching compliance from, again, this high level holistic perspective, by truly governing your compliance program.
Yeah, good point, Patrick.
Thank you.
All right, shall we move on?
Let's do.
So yeah, what does best practice looks like? Again, we're talking about in terms of stepping back, looking at the bigger picture. Understand, here's my compliance frameworks. I'm going to do, you can very quickly, this is the traditional, 8-step approach to understanding where you are now and, against where you need to be. It's just doing a gap assessment. You have 1, 2, but let me be clear, what I'm advocating is putting all the frameworks together and doing a gap assessment that whether it's just, if it's ISO and SOC 2, or if it's ISO and NIS2, or if it's NIS2 and DORA, that you do the one gap assessment against both of the standards. Then form your team. Okay, because then you're going to have a team who's multifaceted enough to address the standards that are required, for each, whether you need a data protection expert on there, an IT expert, a risk assessment expert, etc. But first, one gap assessment on all your frameworks, form your team then, and then map your controls. And I want to talk about that, but essentially mapping what do we currently have. And then, and in doing so, you're going to see the absence of controls and understand very, very quickly how close or how far you are away from compliance. Then and only then start doing a master audit plan. Understand, all right, we start today, we put 3 months, 6 months at it, and it's a prioritized remedial roadmap. The highest risks are addressed first. The next, the critical or the significant second, however you want to, all the way down the line. But always take a prioritized risk approach. And by the way, that's what DORA will tell you. That's what NIST will tell you. That's what ISO will tell you. And then you've got just remedial actions. You implement the program. And of course, once you get compliant, you need to stay compliant. So never, ever, don't forget that it's a continuous improvement. It's a maturity. You might be compliant this year. You know what? It's going to be harder for you to be compliant next year because you've got to mature and make sure that those controls are integrated into the business processes and mature appropriately with the business. But very, very simple. This is what's known, as just best practices. Do a gap assessment, form your team, map your controls, then do the audit plan, integrated compliance plan that has all your frameworks and one-stop shopping. So whether you're project plan or Excel spreadsheets, whatever you're doing, but then make sure then you sort that. You're doing the most critical first. You implement the program and you understand and you build in continuous improvement into every step.
And Richard, a couple of things on this, just to dovetail and really reinforce what you're saying. As we do get to the point where we're forming our team, so step number 2 on screen, assigning explicit accountabilities is absolutely critical. There's an old saying, when 2 or more people are responsible, no one is. And what I think you'll find is that the very same will hold true. Yeah. So we absolutely have to have one person, one designation, one role that's accountable for your compliance program, with the ability to draw in subject matter experts, domain area experts, whatever the case may be, whatever's right for your organization. But one person has to be accountable and one person has to be reporting up to the executive team progress and status. Second thing, after mapping the controls and creating a master audit plan, step number 4, and Richard, this is something, frankly, we have seen be a game changer for organizations. This is something that W. Edwards Deming was big on with TQM. He had this idea that until we make a process, until we make a program visual, there will always be opportunity for confusion and misunderstanding. And so with the visual of the master audit plan, we have a chance to eke out that confusion and that unknown so that organizations can move forward, not only internally from an executive perspective, but also externally with third-party partners, third-party readiness organizations like Risk Crew, third-party auditors like Align. This master audit plan becomes a critical, really a linchpin in how we think about communicating our expectations for the compliance program. And then lastly, continuous improvement. This is a fundamental component of every healthy compliance program and a requisite component for any ISO management system. So for those of you that are pursuing 27001, 22301, 42001 for that matter, continuous improvement and continuous improvement operations, operationalizing your continuous improvement, it is absolutely critical. It's a must for your success.
Agreed. It's everything. Shall we move on?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I was adamant about putting this in because for me, it's at the end of the day, what I look at any framework is this kind of granularity. I look at the framework, whether that's, DORA or NIS2, I understand, I connect it to a policy statement. Thou shalt, whatever it is, what's your policy statement? And then make sure that for every policy statement, you have an applicable control.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you write a policy if you can't implement it? So you want to find the control that's going to enforce that policy. And then for every single control, you should have a very specific written objective. This control is in place to do this. And of course, to enforce the policy. So, but you get, whether that's a firewall rule or the fact that we have to wear badges. Why do we have to wear badges? Why does the firewall need to be configured that way? To stop this traffic or to identify unauthorized visitors, whatever it is, but be specific. Be specific, because, and here's where you can understand that we could have one policy statement and maybe, just maybe, you can have one control that meets many different policy statements by understanding the control objective. And then with that control objective, you've got a key performance indicator. You've got some kind of metric that says this is working. All right, this is working, and it's working from day 1. It's still working on day 68. It's still working at day 384. It's working. And you know it because you have a test procedure to make sure that you verify it's working. And that means the control the objective is being met. That means the control is effective, efficient. That means the policy is in place. That means you're compliant. And if you saw it like this, everything suddenly just lines up. I call it control mapping, connecting the dots, but it's this living on this granular level that I help my clients understand. Just connect the dots, and very quickly you can take a policy, get a control, but not have a control objective, not have a KPI, and start testing it, and you don't know what you're testing for. So you need all 6 of these things to line up. And then when you do testing, you test once. Whether that's, you're doing penetration testing annually, you're doing an audit annually, whatever it is, and you maximize the effectiveness of the output of that test or audit. And it's this kind of view that is, for me, just essential in compliance to anything, much less NIS, DORA, or ISO, or anyway. Any thoughts on this, Patrick? I'd appreciate your input on that.
Not only the framework that you've lined out, the control mapping framework, but you just mentioned test results. And so as I look at what you've drawn in this graphic, I see a box to the right of test procedure labeled test results. So we have a procedure, we get results, and from those results, we can loop right back to policy, and therein creates our continuous improvement loop.
Yeah, circle.
So
yeah, you're right.
Everything that we need to be successful, which I think is amazing. I really love this.
Okay, I'll add that box and we'll copyright it, Patrick's, and put it out there real quickly. Maybe make a T-shirt to sell some merch. But no, that's an excellent tweak that you made. But it's this, for me, it's this view. And if one of these boxes are missing, in my mind, you're bound to have a problem sooner or later. But it's the getting into the weeds and seeing this sort of detail that you have to. All right. Anyway, let's move on, because I see this on a T-shirt already. Patrick, why don't you lead us here?
Sure. Leveraging technology services. And Richard, you mentioned tools, technology, third-party expertise. I think most of our listeners, anyone that's been involved in compliance, even over the last 3 years, has seen an explosion of platforms, technology platforms that have come online, marketing themselves as automated compliance solutions, GRC platforms, you name it. But we have seen an explosion, and really the wild, wild west from a marketing perspective as it relates to technology platforms. What I will say, however, for the discerning organization that can find a GRC platform that is fit for purpose and fit for use for them, the GRC platforms become fundamental to your success. Really, in a lot of ways, as a compliance firm, our hands are tied in the amount of feedback, the amount of guidance, the amount of coaching we can give our customer organizations, because we have to remain impartial. We have to keep organizations, in some cases, at arm's distance, so that we don't violate the objectivity standards that we commit ourselves to through our professional organizations and our professional governance commitments. And so to that end, we see readiness and cybersecurity firms like Risk Crew, and you specifically, Richard, become a fundamental part of this overall ecosystem. So much so that we've been telling people about this vision we have for the 3-legged stool of a successful compliance program. That is a GRC partner platform through the use of technology services to enable and facilitate data collection, work paper collection, things of that nature. We see the readiness firms like Risk Crew that come in and really work to partner and understand an organization so that they can create the right fit of compliance controls for that organization in alignment with its business goals and its compliance standards, very much using the process that you just laid out. And then on the tail end, the assessor firm partner that comes in to evaluate the work that's been done to ensure that the organization is in fact in, I hate to overuse the word compliance, but is in conformance to the various standards. So Richard, in a lot of ways, what we see moving forward, especially for organizations outside the enterprise bucket, this 3-legged stool, these 3 pillars of partnership become absolutely critical in organizations creating value through their compliance programs.
Yeah, well said, Patrick. For me, it's the pick your team part of the best practice. Pick the team that's got the right tools for you.
Okay, moving forward, Richard. Takeaways, and not to repeat myself or to beat a dead horse. One of the things that align that we think is critically important is that organizations do step back and think about what's right for them. Richard, we've seen lots of frameworks, we've seen lots of standards. And in some cases, companies forget that scoping of their environment, of the services that they're delivering, really is the most important thing that can be done once they begin undertaking the journey to come into conformance with those standards. And so based on scoping, based on what's really happening in the environment, we tell all companies that they need to ensure that they're creating compliance aligned with them. And so kind of my takeaway for the group is that always ensure you create compliance aligned to you, meaning you're not getting compliant for someone else. You know, you're not walking this path of creating a compliance program and a compliance strategy for company X. You're doing this for you. And so it has to be right fit. It does have to be fit for purpose, and it has to be fit for use. It needs to do what you want it to do, and it needs to perform when you need it to perform. And the only way to do that is to step back and decide what it is you really want to create in the context of your organization, and then create the control framework that allows you to be successful in understanding those conformance assessments. And that really only happens by forming partnerships and relationships, again, with companies like Risk Crew, with companies like Align, and with companies like the GRC providers of your choice. And then, Richard, I think you have a quote as well.
I do. Mine's on a little different tact. But first of all, I appreciate that. That is. I'm sorry. I was just still absorbing your created aligned to you. That is absolutely what I talk to my clients about. Is this is like it should fit you like a glove. You know, I don't care what framework you're looking at. Your objective is to make that framework fit your business. It's not a box checking exercise. You put it on. It's custom fit. And so whether it's SOC 2 or DORA or whatever we're talking about here, you need to look at what they're putting up in place and understand do I meet the spirit of this in my organization?
Yes.
At the end of the day, I'm a guy who believes that cybersecurity is an oxymoron, right? There's no such thing. Computer security is an oxymoron, no such thing. So what's the game? The game is risk management, and risk management means exactly what you're saying here. You align, you know, when your term of align the risk of the framework to your business, and that's it. That's success. That is successful. So I really like that. So yeah, I have a little different, you know, my takeaway is I just wanted to stress when you see things like, you know, I talked about on a granular level of matching policies to controls and controls to control objectives and et cetera. For me, I wanted to say that cybersecurity is a process, right? This risk management process. It's not a product. And I think this is where we've gone off piste in our industry, thinking we'll buy a firewall and that gives us security. No, it's not the product that makes us secure. It's the process of the product. All right. It's the configuration. It's the updating. It's the, you know, the patching, the hot fixes, the constant rule changes, you know, that determine whether the product is or is not efficient and effective. And so, and I've seen too many of my clients put their faith in a product. All right. We're all, you know, to be secure by X. And that's not it. The game is a process, you know, because cybersecurity is an oxymoron. The game is identify, minimize, and manage the risk. And to do that, you have to understand the process of risk management. And no, I'm saying we all need product, absolutely. But once you have product, there's a process associated with keeping that product at maximum effectiveness.
Yes.
And not just getting a return. Otherwise, you're kidding yourself if you think, well, I got a firewall, I've got an IDS, I've got an IPS, I'm secure, or I'm running anti-malware. Really? Then why are we getting ransomware? You know, it's the effectiveness of that product that we should question and understand. That's the process of questioning and making sure that we understand the associated risks. So, and I apply that to any compliance framework. You know, understand the process of, you know, once you get the framework, then the key, the real challenge is the process that makes sure that every single control that you rely on for compliance is in fact at its absolute best. And that's a process. That's, you get up, you know, you go to sleep one day, you get up the next day, you go back into work and you start again. Identify, minimize, manage, and keep on that trail.
And it's overplayed at this point to say this, but it really is a journey, not a destination. You know, I think so many organizations think my destination is audit, and I get my report on the back end of audit, I'm done until next year. And that is just not the case. It never will be.
It never will be. No, I tell our clients, you know, who come to us for ISO, say, yeah, you know what? First year is easy. second year, that's a third year, fourth year, fifth year, because then you've got to walk the walk and you've got to mature into it and make sure that these processes are integrated into your business, which is not as easy as it sounds. The larger the business, I don't care if you're selling flowers on the internet or you're Microsoft. I mean, it is not, it sounds easy to do, but the devil's in the detail.
That's very
anyway.
Not kind. Yes. But anyway, Richard, I'm sorry. So next slide. Oh,
next slide is it. This is where we say thank you to each other. No, Patrick, thanks. I enjoyed the conversation and your insight. Obviously, this is I think we were going to do a 2 or 3 of these down the road, but this was really helpful for me, just listening to your view on the industry and what we could do better. Thank you for that.
and thank you for having us. Honestly, we really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with your customers, with anyone that's listening, about the importance of approaching your compliance programs strategically. And again, not to continue to point back to you, but Richard, what you and Risk Crew are doing, I think is fundamental to the success of many organizations. So thank you for what you're doing.
Well, that's kind of you to say, Patrick. We love working with Align because we think you guys get it right. You guys, you walk the same walk that we do. You feel that the importance is in the same place, and it's been a really good relationship with you. It's just amazing to see another business, who hasn't walked the same path, suddenly use the same terminology and and see the same end game. Anyway, yes. I thank you for that, Patrick, and I thank everybody else for joining us on today's webcast. Absolutely, please stay tuned to whatever this channel is that goes out, because we'll be having a few more of these down the road. But Patrick Sullivan, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Always, and again, thank you for the opportunity. Very grateful for you.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and see you again soon.